The air in Committee Room 216 was thick with the stale scent of ambition and recycled oxygen, a low hum of anticipation buzzing beneath the fluorescent lights. It was a stage set for a political execution, but the designated victim had not yet read the script. At precisely 9:17 a.m., Congresswoman Maxine Waters, a titan of the Democratic Party and a figure carved from 3 decades of brutal political warfare, leaned into her microphone. Her voice, a familiar instrument of righteous fury, sliced through the room. "Mr. Patel," she began, her words dripping with a carefully crafted disdain meant to wither its target, "you sit there cloaked in the false flag of patriotism, but we see you for what you are, a sycophant, a bootlicker for a failed president. Your parents, who came to this country seeking the promise of America, must be turning in their graves to see their son pledge allegiance not to the flag, but to a cult of personality." A collective intake of breath rippled through the gallery. The attack was sharper, more personal than even the seasoned press corps had anticipated. On the dais, Waters' Democratic colleagues shifted, the raw cruelty of the blow causing a flicker of discomfort. But Waters herself leaned back, a predator's satisfaction in her eyes. She had drawn first blood, and in her world that was the beginning of the end. She failed to notice, however, the stillness of her prey. Kash Patel did not flinch. He did not redden. His gaze remained fixed on her, an unnerving calm settling over his features, the look of a man who had not been surprised but rather validated. In front of him, 5 thick binders sat in a neat row, their plain black covers a stark contrast to the ornate mahogany of the witness table. They were unmarked, anonymous, yet they seemed to pulse with a latent energy. For a long, stretched moment, the only sounds were the frantic clicking of camera shutters and the whisper of journalists' pens on paper. The Congresswoman had just lit a fuse, believing it was attached to a firecracker. She was about to discover it was connected to a munitions depot. The morning had begun with the swagger of a queen holding court. Waters had swept into the room, a whirlwind of crimson fabric and legislative power, her staff trailing like pilot fish in the wake of a shark. "Is Trump's errand boy ready for his close-up?" she had boomed to her chief of staff, the question a performance for the reporters lining the walls. She had seen the binders on the table then, dismissing them as a hollow gesture, the desperate props of a man about to be professionally dismembered. After 32 years of surviving, and indeed thriving, amidst the scandals and skirmishes of Washington, she had come to believe herself invincible. This former prosecutor, this Trump loyalist, would be just another notch on her belt. But the silence that now hung in the air after her attack felt different. It was heavy, charged. Something in Patel's unnerving composure, in the deliberate way he now reached for the first binder, sent the first icy tendril of doubt creeping up her spine. The soft click of the binder opening echoed like a gunshot in the tense quiet. "Congresswoman Waters," Patel's voice was low, measured, yet it carried to every corner of the room with an authority that commanded attention. "You have chosen to invoke the memory of my parents and their journey to this nation, so let us begin there. Let us speak of legacies." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "My parents taught me that the American dream is not a prize to be won, but a standard to be upheld. They taught me that public service is a sacred trust, not a personal bank account." He slid a single, laminated photograph from the binder and placed it on the table before him. It was a picture of a small, tidy convenience store, the kind that dots the landscape of forgotten American towns. "This is where my American story began, in a store open 18 hours a day, built with sweat and sacrifice. Now, let's talk about where your story has led." His hand moved to a second photograph, this one a glossy, aerial shot of a sprawling mansion, its terracotta roof gleaming under the California sun, a turquoise pool shimmering like a jewel in its center. "You invoked the shame of my parents. Let us discuss the shame of the parents in South Lo's Angels, who watch their children play on cracked pavement while their representative resides in a $6 million palace, miles outside the district she is sworn to serve." "How dare you?" Waters began, her voice a low growl, but Patel's next words cut her off like a guillotine. "How dare I? You question the honor of a family who built a life from nothing. So let us compare their dream to the one you have built, an empire of influence and real estate, funded by the very poverty you claim to fight." He held up the photo of her mansion. "This is your fortress of solitude, Congresswoman. 6 bedrooms, a private pool nestled in the exclusive enclave of Hancock Park. And this, he said, holding up a second, stark photo of a street corner plagued by graffiti and decay, is the reality of your district, a place you haven't held a town hall in for over 1,000 days. The room was utterly still. The narrative had been seized. The hunter was now staring into the eyes of a creature far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. You wanted to make this personal, Congresswoman. Patel's voice had lost its quiet deference, replaced now by the cold, hard edge of a prosecutor moving in for the kill. You wanted to talk about family. Then let's talk about the families in your district who can't afford groceries while your campaign funneled over $1 million to your own daughter. Let's talk about the betrayal they feel. Let's talk about integrity. Waters struggled to regain control. This is a pathetic diversion, a classic Trump tactic to— No, Patel's voice was a wall of steel. You don't get to hide behind that name anymore. You opened the door. You invited us into this room of family, honor, and shame. And now we are going to explore every corner of it together. He pulled a document from the binder, its official letterhead stark and undeniable. Let's start with the family of One United Bank. October 2008. The nation is in financial meltdown. A small bank where your husband holds hundreds of thousands of dollars in stock is about to go under. They need a lifeline, a meeting with the Treasury Secretary himself. Who makes that call, Congresswoman? Who leverages their power to save their family's investment with $12 million of taxpayer money? That was investigated and I was cleared, she stammered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Cleared, Patel shot back, a humorless smile touching his lips. Or buried. Because today, Congresswoman, there will be no burials. Today, there is only exhumation. The transformation was breathtaking. The confident warrior who had entered the room was now a cornered animal, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Patel, the quiet witness, had become the embodiment of righteous vengeance. The difference between us, Congresswoman, Patel said, his voice resonating with a chilling clarity, is that my parents are proud of their son for fighting corruption. Your constituents are ashamed that their representative became it. He reached for the second binder, the crisp sound of his fingers on the cover signaling that the first wound was just a prelude. The execution was not just beginning, it was already underway. The silence in the committee room was a physical entity, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound save for the rhythmic, deliberate rustle of paper in Kash Patel's hands. He had closed the first binder and set it aside with the finality of a chapter concluded. Now, his fingers rested on the second, its black cover seeming to absorb the light in the room. Maxine Waters watched the movement, her mind a frantic scramble of defense strategies, each one dissolving before it could fully form. The foundation of her power, built over decades of bluster and intimidation, was cracking in real time. The cameras, once her allies in crafting a public persona, now felt like accusers, their unblinking red lights capturing every flicker of fear in her eyes. Patel opened the second binder. It was thicker than the first, packed with dense columns of numbers, financial statements, and what appeared to be internal campaign communications. Congresswoman Waters, he began, his voice maintaining its unnervingly calm and prosecutorial cadence, since we are on the subject of family and the proper use of power, let us turn our attention to your campaign. Specifically, the entity known as Progressive Connections. The name hung in the air. To the uninitiated, it sounded benign, another generic political consulting firm. But to those in the room who followed the money, it was the key to a kingdom. You see, for nearly 2 decades, your campaign has made regular, substantial payments to this firm. Over $1.2 million to be precise. The massive screen behind Patel, which had previously shown images of mansions and blighted streets, now flickered to life with a spreadsheet. The data was stark, organized by election cycle, each line item a testament to the flow of cash. The heading read, Payments to Progressive Connections, Inc. Below it, the numbers marched in grim procession, a river of money flowing from the Waters for Congress campaign account. $1.2 million, Patel repeated, letting the figure settle. A staggering sum for services described in your FEC filings simply as slate mailer management. Waters saw an opening, a chance to reclaim the narrative with a point of legal fact. Slate mailers are a common and perfectly legal practice in California politics, Mr. Patel, she interjected, her voice regaining a sliver of its former strength. The FEC has reviewed this matter multiple times and found no wrongdoing. Patel met her gaze, a flicker of something almost like pity in his eyes. I am not here to dispute the legality of slate mailers, Congresswoman. I am here to discuss the ethics of a system you have perfected. A system of familial enrichment disguised as political activity. He advanced the slide. A new document appeared on the screen, the Articles of Incorporation for Progressive Connections. The name listed as the sole officer and director was Corinne Waters. Your daughter, Patel stated, the words less an accusation than a simple, damning fact. Your campaign, funded by donors and supporters, many of whom are the very constituents living in the poverty you decry, has paid your daughter over $1 million. But what did she do to earn this fortune? He produced another document, this one an internal email leaked by a former campaign staffer. He began to read. The Corinne Waters operation is the biggest joke in the campaign. She sends a few emails a cycle, maybe makes a handful of calls. The real work, the design, the printing, the coordination with other campaigns who pay to be on the mailer, is handled by vendors or senior staff. Corinne's job is to cash the check. We all know it. It's Maxine's way of passing money to her family under the guise of a legitimate business expense. The gallery murmured, the sound like a rising tide. Reporters who had covered Waters for years, who had heard the whispers of this arrangement, were now seeing the raw data and internal testimony laid bare. The abstract became concrete, the rumor became evidence. But the family enterprise doesn't end with your daughter, does it? Patel continued, his voice a relentless drumbeat of facts. He moved to another section of the binder. Let's talk about your grandson, Michael Moore. Another slide appeared, this one, a collage of vibrant, sun-drenched photos next to a list of campaign payments. According to your own campaign filings, Mr. Moore has been paid thousands of dollars for field operations and community outreach. Yet, according to his own social media, during the very weeks he was supposedly working to get out the vote in South Los Angeles, he was here, a photo of Moore on a yacht in the Caribbean, and here, a picture of him at a VIP table in a Las Vegas nightclub, and here, a shot of him at a luxury music festival. Can you detail for the committee, Congresswoman, what crucial campaign activities your grandson was performing from a cabana in Cabo San Lucas? The question was rhetorical, and its sarcastic edge was devastating. Waters, who had built a career on the image of a fierce matriarch defending her community, was now being portrayed as the matriarch of a grifting dynasty, using campaign coffers as a personal allowance for her relatives. She gripped the microphone, her knuckles white. Family has always supported my work. They have made sacrifices. This is a disgusting smear. Is it a smear to present your own financial records? Patel countered, his voice rising to meet hers. Is it a smear to show that while the median income in your district stagnates below $50,000 a year, you have transformed your political campaign into a family ATM? You haven't just built a political career, Congresswoman. You've built a family business funded by the public trust. The split screen on the news feeds was brutal. On one side, Patel, the calm, methodical prosecutor, armed with spreadsheets and documents. On the other, Waters, her face a mask of fury and desperation, her carefully constructed image crumbling with every new revelation. Patel pressed his advantage, pulling out a final set of documents from the binder. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of this arrangement is the timing. These are bank records, obtained not through any illicit means, but from public divorce filings involving a former associate. They show a curious pattern. He pointed to the screen. Here we see a payment of $75,000 from your campaign to Progressive Connections. 2 days later, a bank record shows Corinne Waters making a down payment on a new luxury SUV. Here, a payment to your grandson for consulting. The next day, a wire transfer from his account to pay off student loan debt. The correlation is undeniable. Your campaign funds, intended for political expression, appear to be directly servicing the personal debts and lifestyle upgrades of your immediate family. You have no right to my family's private records, Waters shouted, half rising from her chair. These are not your private records, Congresswoman, Patel replied, his voice cold as ice. This is the public's money. Money given in good faith by people who believed in you. People who thought they were funding a movement, not a family trust fund. For 20 years, You have treated your campaign account as a slush fund, a way to enrich your children and grandchildren while the children of your district face failing schools and crumbling infrastructure. You are not a champion of the people. You are the CEO of a family corporation masquerading as a public servant. As her aides rushed to her side, offering water and whispered advice, Patel closed the second binder. The sound was a sharp, definitive crack in the silence. He looked not at Waters but at the committee chairman. "Mr. Chairman, we have now established a pattern of profound hypocrisy and familial enrichment. I believe it is time to discuss the real estate empire this enterprise has funded." He reached for the third binder, and a palpable sense of dread filled the room. The assault was not letting up, it was escalating. The brief pause between binders offered no reprieve. It was a calculated silence, a dramatic beat designed to let the weight of the previous revelation sink into the marrow of everyone watching. Maxine Waters, who had once commanded rooms with her booming voice, was now a study in diminishment. She seemed to shrink in her chair, the crimson of her suit suddenly looking less like a symbol of power and more like a splash of blood. Kash Patel's hand moved to the third binder. The label, had there been one, would have read real estate. The large screen behind him, which had been displaying spreadsheets of campaign finance data, now dissolved into a stunning, high-definition satellite image of a palatial estate. The sprawling, Mediterranean-style villa was a vision of opulent tranquility, complete with a shimmering blue swimming pool, a private tennis court, and gardens so perfectly manicured they looked like a painting. "This," Patel announced, his voice devoid of triumph, instead filled with a cold, factual gravity, "is 3620 Windermere Drive, Hancock Park, Los Angeles. It is a 6-bedroom, 5-bathroom mansion currently valued at $6.5 million. It is also the primary residence of Congresswoman Maxine Waters." Waters' attorney, a man who looked increasingly like he wished he were anywhere else, leaned in to whisper to her, but she waved him away with a trembling hand. "There is no law, Mr. Patel," she managed to say, her voice raspy, "that dictates where a member of Congress must live." "You are correct, Congresswoman," Patel conceded, his agreement a strategic maneuver. "There is no law, but there is a profound and damning hypocrisy. For 32 years, you have built your political identity as a fierce, unapologetic warrior for the urban poor, a voice for the voiceless in the struggling neighborhoods of South Los Angeles. Yet you do not live among them. You have chosen to reside in one of the wealthiest, most exclusive, and most racially segregated enclaves in the city." He clicked a button, and a map of Los Angeles appeared on the screen. A jagged red line outlined the boundaries of California's 43rd Congressional District. A bright, pulsating dot, labeled Waters Residence, blinked insistently, miles away from the district's border. "Your district is here," Patel said, gesturing to the red outline. "A community grappling with a poverty rate of 25%, with failing infrastructure and underfunded schools. Your mansion is here," he continued, pointing to the blinking dot, "in a neighborhood with a poverty rate of 3%, where the median home price is over $2 million. You do not share the lived reality of your constituents, Congresswoman. You do not hear the sirens they hear at night. Your grandchildren do not attend the schools their children attend. You have insulated yourself from the very struggles you claim to represent." The screen then split into a brutal, side-by-side comparison. On the left, a sun-dappled street in Hancock Park, lined with pristine Teslas and blooming jacaranda trees. On the right, a street in Hawthorne, in the heart of her district, showing a dilapidated storefront with boarded-up windows and a faded mural. "Let us take a walk through your district, Congresswoman," Patel said, his voice taking on the tone of a grim tour guide, "since it appears to be a journey you so rarely make yourself." One by one, a series of devastating images filled the screen, each a portrait of neglect. "This is Crenshaw Boulevard, not the sanitized version you see in music videos, but the real one. Check cashing stores with predatory interest rates, liquor stores on every corner, and homeless encampments spilling onto the sidewalks. This is Compton Avenue, where residents have been pleading for years for basic services like street repair and reliable trash pickup." The images kept coming, a relentless slideshow of urban decay. Children playing basketball on a court with no hoops, an elderly woman navigating a crumbling sidewalk in a wheelchair, crime scene tape stretched across the entrance to a public park. 32 years, Patel's voice was a low, resonant indictment. "For 32 years you have held this seat. In that time, can you point to a single, meaningful metric of improvement in the quality of life for the people who live here? Not a ceremonial post-office nomming, not a symbolic resolution, but a tangible, measurable improvement in their daily lives. I have brought hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds to my district." Waters shot back, a flash of her old fire returning. "Have you?" Patel's challenge was immediate and backed by data. The screen changed again, now showing statistical charts that compared her district to neighboring ones. "Let's examine the fruits of that funding. The unemployment rate in your district remains stubbornly higher than in surrounding areas. The high school graduation rate is lower. Access to quality health care is worse. Where did the money go, Congresswoman? Did it evaporate? Or was it funneled into projects managed by donors and friends, with little to show for it but ribbon-cutting ceremonies and press releases?" He then returned to her personal finances. "But this mansion, this $6.5 million palace, is not the full extent of your real estate empire, is it? Our research shows you also co-own a luxury property in Palm Springs, a vacation home valued at nearly $1 million, and another property in a desirable coastal community. A career in public service, supplemented by your husband's pension, has somehow enabled you to amass a real estate portfolio worth in excess of $8 million. A new timeline appeared, detailing her property acquisitions over the years, each purchase marked on a graph that also tracked her key legislative actions. "And isn't the timing curious?" Patel asked, pointing to the screen. "In 2004, you acquire a new property shortly after helping to kill a piece of banking regulation that was opposed by your major donors in the financial industry. In 2013, you purchase your Hancock Park mansion just months after the One United Bank you saved with taxpayer funds made a significant contribution to a PAC supporting you. It seems your personal real estate acquisitions have an uncanny habit of following actions that benefit your wealthiest benefactors." The air was thick with the stench of quid pro quo. Patel let the implication hang for a moment before delivering the final, most personal blow of the round. He brought up a new image on the screen. It was a screenshot from a mapping service, showing a small, unassuming office in a tired-looking strip mall. A small sign in the window read, "Office of Congresswoman Maxine Waters. By appointment only. This is your district office, Congresswoman, the sole physical link between you and the 400,000 souls you represent. According to its posted hours, it is open to the public for a grand total of 10 hours per week. When was the last time you held an open town hall, with no pre-screened questions, where any constituent could walk in and ask you why their streets are still broken and their schools are still failing?" She had no answer. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Her chief of staff looked at her with panicked eyes, but she was unreachable, lost in the wreckage of her own public image. "You are not a champion of the poor, Congresswoman Waters," Patel concluded, his voice ringing with a prosecutor's finality. "You are a poverty landlord. You profit from their suffering, using their plight as a stepping stone to national fame and personal wealth, while ensuring nothing fundamentally changes. You keep them angry, you keep them hopeless, and you keep them voting for you, while you watch from the comfort of your distant mansion." He closed the third binder. The sound echoed the closing of a coffin lid. "Mr. Chairman," he said, turning his attention away from the broken figure of Waters, "when we return, I believe it is time to discuss the Congresswoman's long and troubled history with the House Ethics Committee." The committee chairman called for a 15-minute recess. It was a gesture of mercy, a brief halt to the public flogging. As soon as the gavel fell, Maxine Waters' side of the room erupted in frantic, whispered chaos. Aides huddled around her, a phalanx of tailored suits trying to shield her from the prying lenses of the cameras. She looked dazed, her eyes unfocused, as if she were a boxer who had taken too many blows to the head and could no longer remember which corner was hers. On the other side of the room, Kash Patel remained seated. He took a slow sip of water, his demeanor a stark island of calm in the turbulent sea of the hearing room. He didn't consult with anyone. He didn't check his phone. He simply sat with his notes, his posture radiating a chilling patience, the patience of a man who knows the outcome is already decided and is merely playing out the final moves. When the hearing resumed, the change in the room's atmosphere was palpable. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a grim, clinical fascination. The audience was no longer watching a political debate. They were observing a dissection. Waters had been helped back to her seat. Her face was pale, her makeup hastily reapplied, but it could not hide the deep lines of stress etched around her eyes and mouth. She clutched a prepared statement, her hands trembling so violently the paper rattled. "Are you prepared to continue, Congresswoman?" the chairman asked, his tone now more like that of a concerned doctor than a political peer. She nodded, a single jerky movement. "This entire proceeding is a partisan sham," she read, her voice thin and reedy, a ghost of its former power. "A character assassination orchestrated by the enemies of progress." Patel waited for her to finish. He did not react. He simply opened his fourth binder. This one was labeled, in the viewer's imagination, Ethics. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice once again a calm, cutting instrument, "you speak of character. Let us examine the character of your service as judged not by your enemies, but by your own colleagues within your own party on the House Ethics Committee." The screen behind him lit up with the official letterhead of the House Committee on Ethics, dated 2010. "In that year," Patel continued, "the Ethics Committee, then under the control of your fellow Democrats, brought formal charges against you. 3 counts of violating House rules, stemming directly from the One United Bank scandal we discussed earlier. You were accused of using your office to enrich your family, of failing to act impartially, and of bringing discredit to the House of Representatives. You were set to face a public trial, a rare and deeply serious consequence reserved for the most severe breaches of public trust. Those charges were dismissed," Waters interjected, the line a desperate, reflexive defense. "They were not dismissed," Patel corrected her instantly, his voice sharp. "They were buried. A trial was averted. A backroom deal was struck. The investigation vanished. For years, the details of that deal remain one of Washington's quiet secrets. But secrets, Congresswoman, have a shelf life." He produced a new document, a sworn affidavit. "This is the sworn testimony of a former senior staffer for the Ethics Committee. He has come forward to state, under penalty of perjury, that you and your allies engaged in a campaign of intimidation to make the trial go away. He testifies that you threatened to release damaging personal information on other members of the committee. He testifies that you promised to use your influence within the Congressional Black Caucus to orchestrate primary challenges against any Democrat who voted to proceed with your trial. You didn't prove your innocence, Congresswoman. You blackmailed your way to a get-out-of-jail-free card." Gasps rippled through the gallery. This was not an accusation of mere hypocrisy. It was an accusation of obstruction and extortion, aimed at the very body meant to police the integrity of Congress. Even the most jaded reporters scribbled furiously. "But your ethical lapses did not begin in 2010, Patel pressed on, relentless. "That was merely the culmination of a career spent dancing on the edge of the rules and often stepping over it." A timeline appeared on the screen, a long and damning litany of transgression. Maxine Waters, a pattern of ethical misconduct. The list scrolled slowly, each entry a fresh indictment. 1994, investigated for using congressional staff to run a personal business venture. 2002, admonished for illegally using official House resources for campaign purposes. 2005, cited for violating franking privileges, using taxpayer funds to send politically charged mailings. 2017, sanctioned for repeated breaches of decorum and for impugning the character of fellow members on the House floor. 2020, fined by the FEC for a series of campaign finance irregularities. It is a 30-year record of treating the rules that govern public service as mere suggestions, to be ignored whenever they become inconvenient. Patel paused, letting the weight of the accumulated record fill the room. He then pivoted. "But beyond the financial and procedural violations, there is a more dangerous pattern, Congresswoman. A pattern of rhetoric designed not to persuade but to incite." The screen changed to a video clip. It was Waters, standing at a rally in 2018, her face contorted in anger. Her voice, amplified by a sound system, boomed through the committee room. "If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them." The clip ended. The silence it left behind was heavy. "You called for confrontation," Patel said, his voice low and grave. And confrontation is what you got. A series of news headlines flashed on the screen. Sarah Huckabee Sanders asked to leave Virginia restaurant. Protesters confront Kirstjen Nielsen at D.C. eatery. Pam Bondi accosted at movie theater. Your words have consequences, Congresswoman, Patel stated. You lit the match. Your followers started the fires. You gave them the justification to harass and intimidate public officials, to tear at the very fabric of civil discourse. I was exercising my right to free speech. Waters cried out, her voice cracking. Your right to free speech does not include the right to yell fire in a crowded theater, Patel retorted. And it does not include the right to pour gasoline on a nation already smoldering with division. Which brings us to Minneapolis, April 2021. Waters visibly flinched. She knew this was coming. The city was a powder keg during the trial of Derek Chauvin, and you flew in not as a peacemaker but as an agitator. Another audio clip played, her voice urgent and demanding. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business. More confrontational, Patel repeated, the words dripping with condemnation. In a city already boarding up its windows in fear of riots. Within hours of your statement, despite a guilty verdict, violence broke out. National Guardsmen were fired upon. Businesses were looted. And in the chaos you helped fuel, people were hurt. Photos of the aftermath appeared on screen. A burned-out storefront, an injured officer, a family weeping. Your rhetoric is not just words, Congresswoman, it is a weapon, and you have wielded it recklessly for years with no regard for the collateral damage. Suddenly, Waters erupted. She shot to her feet, knocking over her microphone, her face a mask of pure rage. You are an Uncle Tom, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Patel. A race traitor, doing the bidding of your racist masters to tear down a powerful black woman. The outburst was shocking in its raw venom, but Patel did not react. He simply stood, his expression unreadable, as if he were observing a scientific specimen prove his hypothesis. And there it is, he said, his voice cutting through her tirade. The last refuge of a corrupt politician. When the facts become undeniable, you cry racism. When your record is exposed, you claim to be a victim. You have used your race as both a sword to attack your enemies and a shield to protect yourself from accountability. But that ends today. He reached for his final binder, the largest and most ominous of the five. Mr. Chairman, he said, ignoring the sputtering Congresswoman as security personnel moved cautiously toward her. We have one final area to cover. Let us discuss the 1992 Los Angeles riots and the Congresswoman's disturbing connections to foreign money. A new, deeper chill fell over the room. The final act was about to begin. The committee room had transformed. The air, once merely tense, was now heavy with the suffocating atmosphere of a courtroom during a murder trial. The political spectacle had given way to a grim, methodical inquest into the life and career of Maxine Waters. Security officers now stood, not behind the gallery, but in the space between the dais and the witness table, a silent acknowledgement that the proceedings had crossed a threshold into something more volatile. Maxine Waters was a ruin. Her attorney and chief of staff flanked her, their faces grim masks of damage control, but she seemed oblivious to their presence. Her gaze was fixed on the final, thickest binder in Kash Patel's possession, her expression one of pure, unadulterated dread. This was the abyss she had been fearing. Patel opened the last binder with a somber deliberation. The contents were different. There were no spreadsheets or campaign finance reports. Instead, there were grainy photographs, heavily redacted intelligence documents, and records of international wire transfers that snaked across pages like a venomous serpent. Congresswoman Waters, Patel began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying an immense weight that silenced every corner of the room. I want to take you back to a pivotal moment in your city's history. April 29, 1992. The date hung in the air, instantly evoking images of fire, violence, and chaos. The Los Angeles riots. Waters' attorney shot to his feet. Objection, Mr. Chairman. The events of 1992 are ancient history and have absolutely no bearing on this hearing. The chairman, his face etched with weariness, waved him down. The witness has been granted latitude to establish a pattern of behavior. He may continue. For now. Patel nodded, his eyes never leaving Waters. The large screen behind him came to life, not with data but with a timeline of the 6 days that tore Los Angeles apart. Key moments were marked, and next to them, Waters' own public statements from the time. Day 1, the verdict is read and the city erupts. Day 2, as buildings burn and violence spreads, you go on record stating, "No justice, no peace." Day 3, with the death toll rising, you declare the events are not a riot but a rebellion. You did not call for calm, Congresswoman. You provided a political justification for chaos. The screen filled with harrowing images from 1992, photographs that had been seared into the national consciousness. A Korean-American shopkeeper, armed with a rifle, standing guard on the roof of his looted store. A man being dragged from his truck and brutally beaten. A child, her face streaked with tears and soot, standing before the smoldering ruins of her family's business. 63 people died, Congresswoman. Patel's voice was heavy with condemnation. Over 2,000 were injured. More than $1 billion in property was destroyed, wiping out a generation of small business owners, many of them minorities and immigrants. And while your city burned, you went on national television and acted not as a leader, but as an apologist for the violence. A video clip played, showing a younger, fiery Waters speaking to a reporter amidst the backdrop of smoke-filled skis. "This is the language of the unheard," she declared. "When you deny people justice, you cannot be surprised when they lash out." The clip ended, leaving her own words to echo in the silent room. "But our investigation," Patel continued, his voice hardening, "uncovered a deeply disturbing financial postscript to this tragedy." He produced a new set of documents, property deeds and campaign contribution records. In the months following the riots, as property values in the devastated areas plummeted, a handful of real estate developers, all of whom were major donors to your campaigns, swept in. They bought up entire city blocks for pennies on the dollar. The screen displayed a flow chart. On one side, a list of developers. Arrows showed their acquisition of burned-out properties. On the other side, a list of campaign contributions from those same developers flowing into the Waters for Congress account. "You presided over a tragedy, Congresswoman," Patel stated, his voice cold and flat. "And then your donors profited from it. They got rich off the ruins, and you got a fresh infusion of campaign cash to solidify your power. You didn't just excuse the rebellion. You and your benefactors cashed in on it." Waters made a small, strangled sound, a wounded animal's cry. Her attorney was whispering frantically in her ear, likely begging her to walk out, but she was frozen, transfixed by the methodical destruction of her legacy. "But as sickening as that is," Patel said, his voice dropping even lower, "it is not the most dangerous secret hidden in your career." He turned to the final section of the binder. "Let us talk about your foreign connections." The screen shifted to a complex, spiderweb-like diagram of shell corporations, nonprofits, and international bank accounts. Red lines connected these disparate entities to a single name at the center, Maxine Waters. For years, banks have been filing suspicious activity reports, or SARs, on financial transactions linked to you, your family, and your political operations. A pattern of money flowing from foreign sources, through opaque organizations, and into coffers that benefit you. He began to list them, each one a hammer blow. A $500,000 donation from a front group later identified as being controlled by a Chinese state-owned enterprise, funneled to a PAC that ran ads exclusively supporting you. $300,000 from an American-based cultural organization that the FBI has since linked to the Iranian government, paid to a consulting firm owned by a close associate of your daughter. $250,000 from a firm connected to a Russian oligarch, paid to your grandson's consulting business for services that were never rendered. "This is McCarthyism," her attorney shouted, finding his voice. "You are drawing sinister connections where none exist." "Are they?" Patel challenged, his voice like steel. He clicked to the next image. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. It was a photograph clearly taken by a surveillance team of a private dinner. In it, a smiling Maxine Waters was seated at a table with several men. This was taken during a congressional trade delegation to Beijing in 2015, Patel explained. But according to intelligence reports, 3 of the men at your table were not businessmen. They were identified officers of the Ministry of State Security, China's main intelligence agency. They were later expelled from the United States for espionage. "What were you discussing at a private dinner with Chinese spies, Congresswoman?" Waters began to hyperventilate, her chest rising and falling in ragged, shallow breaths. Her eyes were wide with panic. The room started to spin. "We need to stop this hearing," her attorney yelled. "My client is having a medical emergency." A medic who had been on standby rushed to her side. But Patel was not finished. He held up one final document, its pages stamped with classification markings. "One last thing," he said, his voice cutting through the rising chaos. "This is a declassified assessment from our own intelligence community. It concludes that foreign adversaries have identified you as a useful asset, not a conscious spy, but something perhaps more insidious. A political figure whose divisive rhetoric, attacks on American institutions, and history of corruption so perfectly align with their goals that you actively serve their purpose of weakening America from within." He read from the report. Subject Waters' continued promotion of racial strife and her attacks on the legitimacy of the U.S. justice system are regularly amplified by Russian and Chinese state media. She is, in effect, an unpaid agent of influence for our adversaries. The revelation was the final, fatal blow. It reframed her entire career not just as one of greed and hypocrisy, but as one that had made her a tool for America's enemies. 32 years, Patel concluded, his voice now ringing with the force of a final judgment. 32 years of enriching yourself while your district decayed. 32 years of stoking division while claiming to seek justice. 32 years of behavior so toxic that the enemies of our nation see you as an ally. He stood up, gathering his binders. "You are not just a disgrace to this Congress, Congresswoman Waters. You are a threat to our national security." At that moment, Waters' eyes rolled back in her head. She slumped forward, her body convulsing, and collapsed onto the table with a sickening thud. "Medic!" someone screamed. Chaos erupted. As medical staff swarmed around her, Patel turned to the chairman. "I rest my case." The collapse of Maxine Waters was not a quiet slump. It was a violent, convulsive event that sent a shockwave of pure chaos through Committee Room 216. Her body, limp and unresponsive, was a stark centerpiece in a tableau of pandemonium. Shouts for a medic echoed off the marble walls as her attorney and aides, their faces masks of sheer panic, tried to assist her. The chairman, his face ashen, banged his gavel in a futile attempt to restore order, the sound lost in the cacophony. Paramedics rushed in, a whirlwind of professional urgency, creating a perimeter around the fallen Congresswoman, their movements swift and practiced as they checked her vitals and prepared a stretcher. Amidst the frenzy, Kash Patel stood for a moment, a figure of unnerving stillness. He methodically squared the edges of his 5 binders, stacking them into a neat black tower of evidence. He gave a slight, formal nod to the chairman, then turned and walked toward the exit, his task complete. He moved not with the swagger of a victor, but with the quiet purpose of an executioner leaving the gallows. As he reached the doorway, a reporter from the scrum that had instantly formed broke free, shoving a microphone toward his face. Mr. Patel, do you have any final comment on what just happened?" Patel paused, his gaze sweeping over the chaotic scene one last time before turning to the camera, its red light a solitary, focused eye in the storm. He leaned in, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable message that was not just for the room, but for the nation watching. "Today was not about one politician," he said, his words precise and deliberate. "It was about a principle. The principle that in this nation truth is not partisan and accountability is not optional. To every elected official who has forgotten that, who has grown comfortable in the shadows of their own power, I have one message. The lights are coming on." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind the wreckage of a 32-year career. Within seconds of his exit, the digital world detonated. The term Watersgate exploded across social media, becoming the #1 trending topic globally in under 5 minutes. The velocity of the information spread was unlike anything seen before. Clips of the hearing, edited and packaged by thousands of citizen journalists, went viral. The most potent were the split screens. Waters' initial, arrogant smirk juxtaposed with her final, convulsive collapse. Patel's calm presentation of evidence contrasted with her screaming, racialized outbursts. These short, brutal videos became the currency of the story, shared millions of times per hour across every conceivable platform. The mainstream media, which had for years treated Waters as an untouchable icon of the progressive left, was thrown into a state of disarray. On CNN, the lead anchor, his face a mixture of shock and professional gravity, struggled to frame the narrative. "What we have witnessed today," he began, his voice somber, "is a political event of seismic proportions. A systematic, evidence-based dismantling of one of the most powerful figures in the Democratic Party, broadcast live for the world to see. The allegations are not just serious. They are, if true, catastrophic." Over on MSNBC, a panel of commentators, many of whom had personally defended Waters for years, looked shell-shocked. One prominent host, known for her fiery defenses of the Congresswoman, spoke in a hushed, defeated tone. I don't know what to say. The evidence presented was not opinion. It was documented. The bank records, the ethics reports, the internal emails. I cannot in good conscience defend what I saw today. We have to ask ourselves, how did we miss this? Fox News, predictably, treated the event as a vindication. Their primetime lineup ran segments with titles like The Reckoning and Swamp Dragon Slayed. Yet, even their most bombastic hosts delivered the news with a certain awe. The sheer precision and overwhelming nature of Patel's presentation had transcended typical partisan squabbling. It wasn't just a political victory. It was a total annihilation. The political fallout was immediate and brutal. The office of the Speaker of the House, a longtime ally and friend of Waters, released a terse, one-sentence statement that was a masterclass in political distancing. "The allegations raised in today's hearing are deeply disturbing and must be investigated to the fullest extent. There was no defense of her character, no mention of her years of service. It was the political equivalent of being cast into the outer darkness." The Congressional Black Caucus, the very group Waters had allegedly used as a threat to intimidate the Ethics Committee, was forced into an emergency meeting. They emerged hours later with a statement that was equally devastating. "No single member is above the integrity of the institutions we serve," their chairman read. "We support a full and impartial investigation by all appropriate bodies." The message was clear. She was on her own. The party apparatus, which had protected her for decades, was now severing all ties, desperate to cauterize the wound before the poison could spread to the rest of the body politic. As the sun set on Washington, D.C., the story was no longer just about Maxine Waters. It was about the system that had enabled her. It was about the media that had protected her. It was about the voters who had repeatedly elected her. And it was about the quiet, methodical man with 5 black binders who had, in the space of a few hours, held a mirror up to the entire political establishment, forcing it to confront the ugly reflection staring back. The era of Maxine Waters was over. The age of accountability had, with terrifying suddenness, just begun. The days that followed the hearing were a blur of cascading consequences, each one landing with the force of an aftershock. While Maxine Waters remained hospitalized, secluded from the firestorm she had ignited, the institutions of power in Washington began to move with a speed and ferocity rarely seen. The initial shockwave of her public collapse gave way to the cold, grinding mechanics of official investigation. The House Ethics Committee, the very body she had allegedly blackmailed into submission a decade earlier, was the first to act. In a move of unprecedented swiftness, the committee's Republican chairman and Democratic ranking member held a joint press conference. Standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces grim, they announced the formation of a special investigative subcommittee. "The evidence presented by Mr. Patel, drawn from public records and sworn testimony, leaves us with no alternative," the chairman stated. "We are launching a comprehensive investigation into every allegation, from the misuse of campaign funds and the One United Bank affair to the accusations of witness intimidation and undisclosed foreign contacts." The ranking Democrat added, "This is not a partisan issue. It is a question of the integrity of this institution. No one, regardless of their tenure or position, is above the rules of this House." The bipartisan unity was a death knell for Waters' career. She had lost the protection of her party, and with it, her last line of defense. Simultaneously, the Department of Justice, which had remained silent for the first 24 hours, issued a terse but potent statement. A spokesperson confirmed that the DOJ's Public Integrity Section was opening a formal criminal probe. The statement was carefully worded, noting they were reviewing the testimony and evidence presented to the committee to determine whether federal laws were violated. The focus, it was whispered among legal analysts, would be on the wire transfers from foreign-linked entities, the potential quid pro quo surrounding the bank bailout, and the possibility of tax evasion related to the undeclared family income. The story shifted from one of political ethics to one of potential felonies. The Federal Election Commission, often derided as a toothless watchdog, also roared to life. The FEC announced a full-scale audit of the Waters for Congress campaign committee, stretching back not just 1 or 2 cycles, but a full 20 years. They would scrutinize every payment made to Progressive Connections, every consulting fee paid to a family member, every expenditure that seemed to blur the line between legitimate campaign activity and personal enrichment. In her home state of California, the state attorney general announced a parallel investigation, focusing specifically on the One United Bank scandal and the Slate mailer operation, which fell under state as well as federal jurisdiction. It was a multi-front war, a coordinated assault by every regulatory and law enforcement body that had a claim to the case. The walls were closing in, not just on Waters, but on her entire family. Subpoenas were reportedly being drawn up for her husband, her daughter Corinne, and her grandson Mikhail. Their lives, once comfortably subsidized by the family's political machine, were about to be dissected by forensic accountants and federal investigators. While the official investigations geared up, Waters' personal world was crumbling. She was moved from the initial hospital to a private cardiac care facility, with her office citing stress-induced arrhythmia. But the diagnosis did little to quell the political bleeding. Longtime donors, the very people whose interests she had allegedly served, began to publicly distance themselves. CEOs of major corporations who had once clamored for a photo op with her now issued statements to the press emphasizing their commitment to ethical governance and claiming their contributions were meant to support the community, not any single individual. Her political action committee, once a formidable fundraising vehicle, began to hemorrhage money as donors demanded refunds. Her colleagues in the House, who once feared her, now treated her name like a contagion. When a reporter asked a senior Democrat if he had reached out to Waters to offer his support, the congressman physically recoiled before answering, "My focus is on the legislative agenda for the American people." It was a brutal, public shunning. The most telling sign of her fall, however, came from her own district. A news crew from a local Los Angeles station set up a camera on a street corner in South LA and simply asked residents for their reaction. The responses were a heartbreaking mix of anger, betrayal, and weary resignation. "We trusted her," said one elderly woman, her voice thick with emotion. "She was supposed to be our voice, but it turns out she was just using us, using our pain to get rich." Another man, a small business owner, gestured to his struggling shop. "I've been here for 30 years. I've watched this neighborhood get worse and worse. And all that time she was living in a mansion. It's like a knife in the back." There was no rally of support, no protest defending her. The people she claimed to champion were now providing the most damning testimony of all, not in a committee room, but on the cracked sidewalks of the district she had left behind. When she was finally discharged from the hospital after 3 days, she did not emerge to a crowd of supporters. She was whisked away in a black SUV, shielded from the cameras by a phalanx of attorneys. The fiery warrior was gone. In her place was a fugitive from the truth, a frail, defeated woman whose name had become synonymous with the very corruption she had once claimed to fight. Her resignation was no longer a question of if, but when. The end, when it came, was not delivered from a podium or a press conference, but through a sterile, 2-paragraph email sent from her attorney's office. It arrived in the inboxes of news outlets on a Friday afternoon, a time slot chosen to bury the news. But this was a story that refused to be buried. The statement was brief, stripped of all the usual political platitudes. It read, "After careful consideration and consultation with my family and physicians, I have come to the conclusion that I can no longer effectively serve the people of California's 43rd District. Therefore, I am announcing my resignation from the United States Congress, effective immediately. I will cooperate fully with all ongoing investigations. My family and I ask for privacy during this profoundly difficult time." And that was it. 32 years of power, of influence, of being unbought and unbossed, extinguished with a quiet digital whimper. The fiery rhetoric was gone, the righteous indignation replaced by the stark, cold language of legal necessity. The resignation was not an admission of guilt, but it was an unconditional surrender. It was the act of a queen toppling her own king to end a lost game. The news of her resignation sent a final, shuddering tremor through the political landscape, but it was a tremor of finality, not surprise. It was the last chapter of a story whose ending had already been written on live television. While Waters retreated into a self-imposed exile, the world's attention turned to the man who had single-handedly brought her down. Kash Patel became, against his will, a phenomenon. He was inundated with interview requests from every major network and newspaper in the world. Book publishers descended, with offers reportedly climbing into the eight-figure range for a tell-all memoir of the takedown. Hollywood producers began circling, envisioning a dramatic feature film. Political operatives from both parties began floating his name for future office, a Senate run, a gubernatorial campaign. Patel, however, rejected it all. He gave a single, exclusive interview to a small, independent journalist known for long-form, policy-focused work, and used the platform not to glorify himself, but to further his message. "I am not the story," he stated, his demeanor as calm and measured as it had been in the hearing room. "The story is the information. The story is the fact that for decades, a system of corruption was allowed to fester because its exposure was inconvenient. The documents I presented were, for the most part, public records, bank statements from court filings, FEC reports, ethics complaints, property deeds. Any citizen with a library card and an internet connection could have found them. The only thing I did was put them all in one place." When asked about the multi-million-dollar book offers, he was unequivocal. "I will not profit from exposing corruption. To do so would make me a participant in the very system I sought to condemn, would turn a civic duty into a commercial enterprise." Instead of a book tour, he announced the formation of a nonprofit organization, funded by a modest seed grant from a civil liberties foundation. He called it the Public Accountability Project. Its mission was simple: to create open-source tools and training programs that would teach ordinary citizens how to conduct their own investigations into their elected officials. The website launched with a simple tagline: "You are the Oversight Committee." The response was overwhelming. Within a week, the project had received thousands of small-dollar donations from citizens across the country. Volunteer chapters began to form organically in all 50 states, composed of retired accountants, librarians, lawyers, and concerned parents, all eager to learn how to pull the public records on their own city council members, school boards, and state representatives. The Patel effect, as some commentators began to call it, was not just about the fall of one corrupt politician. It was about the empowerment of a disillusioned citizenry. The hearing had been more than a political drama. It had been a masterclass in civic action. It demonstrated that the weapons needed to fight corruption were not necessarily power or influence, but diligence, patience, and an unwavering commitment to factual evidence. This wave of civic engagement began to have a tangible impact. In the months that followed, a surprising number of long-term incumbents in various states, politicians who, like Waters, had held their seats for decades with little opposition, abruptly announced their retirements. The official reasons were always to spend more time with family or to pursue new opportunities. But the unofficial reason was clear. They were afraid of being the next to face a citizen-led Patel treatment. A new era of scrutiny was dawning. Campaign finance reform, a topic that had been stalled in Congress for a generation, suddenly found new life. A bipartisan group of senators, sensing the shift in the national mood, introduced a piece of legislation they called the Waters, Working Accountability and Transparency in Elections and Representation Statute. It included strict new rules limiting the ability of campaigns to employ family members, mandated clearer disclosures of financial interests, and increased penalties for ethics violations. The bill, which would have been dead on arrival just months earlier, now had a genuine path to becoming law. The reckoning had begun. It was quieter than the dramatic hearing, but far more profound. It was the sound of a sleeping public waking up, realizing that the power to hold their leaders accountable had been in their hands all along. They just needed someone to show them how to use it. While the political and social shockwaves of the hearing continued to ripple across the nation, a quieter, more methodical process was unfolding in the sterile corridors of courthouses and federal buildings. The drama of the public square gave way to the deliberate, grinding machinery of the American justice system. For Maxine Waters and her family, the true reckoning was just beginning. The initial phase was a deluge of subpoenas. Federal marshals, discreet and professional, served papers at the Hancock Park mansion, at Karen Waters' upscale residence, and at the modest apartment of her grandson, Michael Moore. The documents demanded a universe of information: decades of personal and business tax returns, bank statements from a dozen different institutions, all communications related to the One United Bank, and every record associated with the Progressive Connections slate mailer operation. The family's life was no longer their own. It was now Exhibit A in a sprawling criminal investigation. A team of elite forensic accountants from the IRS and the FBI was assembled. Their task was to reconstruct the financial DNA of the Waters family enterprise. They worked in a secure, windowless room, surrounded by mountains of documents, their screens filled with complex spreadsheets that traced the flow of money from campaign donors to shell companies, from nonprofits to personal bank accounts. They followed the digital breadcrumbs with a relentless, dispassionate precision that was far more terrifying than any political attack. The first public sign of the investigation's progress came 3 months after the hearing. A federal grand jury was impaneled in Washington, D.C. one by one. Former aides, campaign staffers, and even rival politicians who had paid to be on the infamous slate mailers were seen walking into the federal courthouse, their faces grim. The most significant witness was the former Ethics Committee staffer whose sworn affidavit Patel had used. He reportedly testified for 2 full days, providing a detailed, insider account of the alleged blackmail and obstruction that had derailed Waters' ethics trial a decade earlier. The legal pressure on the family was immense. Federal prosecutors, employing a classic strategy, began by targeting the weaker links in the chain. Michael Moore, the grandson whose lavish vacations had been funded by the campaign, was the first to face charges. He was indicted not for the grand conspiracy, but for simple, undeniable tax fraud for failing to declare his consulting payments as income. Faced with the prospect of a felony conviction and prison time, he quickly agreed to cooperate with the investigation against his mother and grandmother in exchange for a more lenient sentence. Next came Karen Waters. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The paper trail from the Waters for Congress campaign to her Progressive Connections account, and then to her personal expenses, was irrefutable. Her indictment included multiple counts of tax evasion and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Her attorneys, seeing no viable defense, entered into plea negotiations. The fall of her daughter was a devastating blow to Maxine Waters, isolating her completely. She had hired a high-powered and ruinously expensive legal team who initially mounted a vigorous public defense, claiming she was the victim of a political witch hunt. But their arguments withered in the face of the mountain of evidence the prosecution was methodically leaking to the press. There were the bank records showing a direct correlation between donor contributions and personal real estate purchases. There were the depositions of Treasury officials who confirmed she had threatened their budget during the One United bailout negotiations. And most damningly, there was the testimony of her own family members. The climax of the legal process was not a dramatic trial. Faced with an ironclad case and the prospect of spending the rest of her life in prison, if convicted on all counts, Maxine Waters accepted a plea agreement. She appeared in federal court not as a defiant congresswoman, but as a humbled defendant. Dressed in a plain black suit, her face pale and drawn, she stood before the judge and spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit tax evasion and 1 count of making false statements to federal investigators. As part of the plea, she was forced to read a detailed factual stipulation, a narrative of her own corruption. She had to publicly admit to using campaign funds for personal enrichment, to hiding the income funneled to her daughter, and to misleading ethics officials about her role in the bank bailout. It was the final, complete humiliation. The sentencing hearing took place months later. The courtroom was packed. The judge, a stern appointee known for his nonpartisan approach, delivered a scathing lecture before announcing the sentence. "For 30 years, you held a position of sacred public trust," he said, looking directly at Waters. "And for 30 years, you systematically betrayed that trust. You did not just break the law, you corroded the very foundation of our representative democracy. You used the plight of the poor as a shield for your own avarice. This sentence is not just about punishing you. It is about reaffirming the principle that no one in this country is above the law." He sentenced her to 18 months in a federal correctional facility for women. He also imposed a fine of $2 million and ordered the forfeiture of assets deemed to be the proceeds of corruption. The magnificent Hancock Park mansion, the symbol of her hypocrisy, was seized by the U.S. Marshals Service. Her daughter, Karen, received a 6-month sentence for her role in the scheme. Her grandson, Mikkel, was given probation in exchange for his testimony. The empire had crumbled. The fortune was gone. The family was broken. The woman who had once commanded the national stage was now just another inmate number, stripped of her power, her wealth, and her name, left with nothing but the quiet, empty years of her sentence to contemplate the true cost of her choices. 5 years later, the echoes of the hearing that destroyed Maxine Waters had not faded. They had become embedded in the very fabric of American political life. The event, now known in history textbooks and political science courses as the Patel Reckoning, was studied as a singular turning point, a moment when the slow creep of institutional decay was met with an equally powerful and unexpected force of public accountability. The name Maxine Waters had become a cautionary tale, a political ghost story whispered by senior party members to ambitious newcomers, a stark reminder of the perils of hubris and the long memory of public records. The committee room where she had met her political end, room 216, had been unofficially, then officially, renamed the Accountability Chamber. A small, discreet plaque was mounted by the door, bearing a simple, powerful quote from the hearing's aftermath. "Truth is not partisan. Accountability is not optional." It served as a silent warning to every politician who walked its halls. After serving 12 months of her 18-month sentence, Waters was released to a world that had moved on without her. Her fortune gone, consumed by fines, restitution, and legal fees, she lived in a small, rented apartment in a modest Los Angeles suburb, a world away from the manicured lawns of Hancock Park. Occasionally, local residents would spot her in the aisle of a grocery store or waiting in line at the pharmacy. She was a ghost of her former self, a frail, anonymous figure, the fire in her eyes long extinguished, replaced by the vacant stare of someone haunted by the memory of a life of power and prestige that had vanished in a single, televised morning. Her fall had created a power vacuum in her former district, but it was not filled by another politician of her ilk. The special election held to replace her was a watershed moment. For the first time in a generation, the race was not about personality or party loyalty, but about policy and local issues. The winner was a young, energetic community organizer, a woman who had grown up in the district, attended its public schools, and still lived in a small bungalow 2 blocks from where she was raised. Her victory speech, delivered from a local park instead of a fancy hotel ballroom, captured the new mood. "I make you one promise," she told the cheering crowd. "I will never forget where I came from, and I will never live so far away that I can no longer hear your voices." Kash Patel, the man who had set this new era in motion, remained true to his word. He never ran for office. He never wrote the multi-million-dollar book. He continued his work as a federal prosecutor, taking on complex cases of financial fraud and public corruption, far from the glare of the media spotlight. His public accountability project, however, had grown into a formidable national force. With chapters in every state, it had become a grassroots version of the FBI's Public Integrity Section, training thousands of citizen auditors who were now a constant, watchful presence at school board meetings, city council sessions, and state legislative hearings. They had become the nation's unofficial immune system, detecting and exposing the cancer of local corruption before it could metastasize. The Waters Act had passed into law, and its effects were tangible. The practice of hearing family members for vague campaign, consulting, roles had all but disappeared. Financial disclosures were more transparent, and the House Ethics Committee, once a toothless body, now operated with a newfound vigor, knowing that an army of citizen watchdogs was looking over its shoulder. The political landscape had fundamentally shifted. The age of the untouchable career politician, insulated by power and party, was over. A new, more fragile but more honest equilibrium had been established. The swamp had not been drained entirely. It never could be. But a powerful new filtration system had been put in place, and it had all started with 5 black binders and a prosecutor who refused to be intimidated. In the end, the legacy of that day was not one of destruction, but of renewal. It was a brutal, painful, but necessary reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires vigilance. It demands participation. It entrusts its citizens with the power to hold their leaders accountable, a power that lies dormant until someone has the courage to use it. The story of Maxine Waters is a testament to what happens when that power is forgotten. The story of Kash Patel is a testament to what happens when it is remembered. The choice of which story our future will tell is not up to the politicians in Washington. It is up to us. If you believe that accountability matters, that truth has no party, and that the powerful must answer to the people they serve, then make your voice heard. Smash that like button, subscribe to this channel for more stories that matter, and share this video with anyone who still believes in the promise of a government of by and for the people. The accountability era has begun. Be a part of it.